Welcome back. If you've been following along, you now know that medieval medicine involved a lot of staring at pee and occasionally tasting it. But that was only one part of a doctor's day. Let's float slowly through the rest of their lives. Morning routine, robes, rituals, and reading pee. A typical day began at dawn, or whenever the sun was bright enough to illuminate your collection of matulas. Doctors loved routines, partly to stay sane, partly to impress patients. They would dress in long robes, sometimes lined with fur for status. The better the robe, the more clients trusted you. Because nothing says, I can diagnose your bile imbalance, like wearing velvet while holding a jar of yellow liquid. Breakfast was usually light, porridge, bread, maybe cheese. Some doctors believed their food affected their humors. A warm breakfast could balance phlegm, while too much cheese might aggravate black bile. So yes, nutrition science existed, just wrapped in mysticism and melancholy. After breakfast, the doctor might check their astrology chart. Mars is in Sagittarius, they'd murmur. Time to treat a fever, but not too aggressively. It sounds odd, but this was standard procedure. Your urine and the stars both had something to say about your health. House calls, bringing the matula to the masses. If you were lucky, you didn't have to leave the comfort of your study. But most patients expected house calls, often in cramped, dark cottages or drafty city homes. Imagine a doctor carefully balancing a satchel of jars while walking across cobblestones. Inside, the matulas clinked gently, like a tiny orchestra of yellow. When arriving, the doctor would greet the patient with a mixture of solemnity and confidence. They'd say, I see you've brought a fine specimen, let us inspect. Then came the ritual. Swirling the flask gently, holding it up to the light, sniffing, occasionally touching the tip to the tongue. The patient would nod politely, even if they weren't sure why they were here. By the end, they usually left with a prescription, a ritual, or a vague sense of reassurance. And of course, there was often a lecture about prayer, diet, and avoiding evil humors. Prescriptions, herbs, leeches, and other oddities. Once diagnosis was complete, the next step was treatment. Here, where the medieval doctor really shines in the quirky department. Herbs. Doctors had a vast knowledge of herbs, chamomile, mint, sage, and a host of others. Each plant corresponded to a humor or ailment. For instance, mint could cool excess bile, while sage helped with melancholy. Leeches and bloodletting. Bloodletting was common, sometimes daily. A patient might leave the doctor's office with a leech attached to their arm, bleeding for balance. It sounds unpleasant, but in their minds it worked, because restoring the humors was crucial. Cupping. Cupping involved heating glass cups and placing them on the skin to draw blood to the surface. It was messy, slow, and occasionally scalding, but believed to release toxins. In modern terms, it's like a spa treatment from hell. Other oddities. Purgatives, forcing the patient to vomit or purge their bowels. Poultices, sloppy herbal pastes applied to the skin. Magical amulets. Occasionally, a small charm was recommended because science and superstition were inseparable. The social life of doctors. Doctors were in many ways social animals. Their status depended on how well they navigated society, not just medicine. They drank in taverns with merchants and nobles, exchanged gossip about plague outbreaks, and debated theories late into the night. Sometimes they argued about pee charts with obsessive intensity. Your chart says it's golden, but I insist it's amber. And the discussion could last hours. They also maintained rivalries because prestige mattered. No one wanted to be known as the doctor who misread the color of a duchess's urine. Reputation could mean the difference between royal patrona and obscurity. Patient classes, nobles versus commoners. Not all patients were treated equally. Nobles had elaborate samples, sometimes delivered in silver flasks. Expected gentle explanations and comforting words. Could afford the fanciest herbs and treatments. Commoners brought urine in simple jars, received fewer treatments and often more blunt advice, were sometimes dismissed as earthy or common bile types. This wasn't just snobbery, it was part of the whole humor-based worldview. Doctors believed aristocrats' humors were more refined. Peasants' humors were rough around the edges. The economics of pee. Being a medieval doctor wasn't just science, it was business. Doctors charged for consultation, house visits, remedies, and even for the spectacle of examining the sample. Some wealthy physicians became rich simply by being confident and fashionable. They didn't necessarily need to cure patients, just make them feel like they were being cared for by someone competent. And remember, this was before modern hospitals. If you got sick, you relied entirely on these experts. Confidence mattered more than actual results. Education and pee rituals. Students of medicine often practiced on each other. They'd collect urine from classmates, compare colors, and debate which humors were dominant. Some schools even staged mock diagnostics. Here is a patient who says he is ill. Diagnose. This sounds odd now, but it was considered essential training. By the time they graduated, they could recognize over 20 urine colors, diagnose fevers, digestive issues, and melancholy, and occasionally predict life expectancy. It was rigorous, tedious, and occasionally disgusting. Gender and age in practice. Doctors often adjusted their approach depending on the patient's sex and age. Women, considered colder and wetter than men, more likely to be diagnosed with excess phlegm or melancholy. Prescriptions often included balancing emotional humors alongside herbs. Children, seen as fragile and volatile. Urine examined with particular care. Small differences could indicate digestive imbalance or too much black bile. This led to a curious combination of superstition and observation. While doctors misread many things, their attentiveness sometimes helped spot real illness. The quiet loneliness of the doctor. Despite the busy house calls and social life, doctors often experienced solitude. Many worked long hours studying texts, copying charts, and preparing remedies. Some became obsessed with their collections of jars. It was a quiet, ritualistic life. They were part scholar, part alchemist, part showman, but mostly alone with the smells and colors of human fluids. End of day reflection. After sunset, the doctor returned to their study. Candlelight flickered against shelves of books and lined rows of maculas. They might jot notes about patients, colors observed, and treatments applied. Perhaps they reflected on mistakes, or the subtle differences in one day's urine versus another. Then came dinner, a bit of reading and rest. Because tomorrow, the same routine would continue. Swirl, sniff, prescribe, advise, and gently gaze at the mysterious secretions of humanity. And somewhere in that slow rhythm, they felt purpose. Even if all they had was a bottle of pee, a macula, and an unwavering sense of authority. Let's pause here. In part 4, we'll meander into the darker, stranger, and occasionally tragic aspects of the obsession with bodily fluids, the strange remedies, courtly scandals, and how pee even intersected with royal life. Because, of course, when you're a doctor in the Middle Ages, urine isn't just medicine, it's a status symbol, a diagnostic tool, and a little window into the human soul. Welcome back. By now, you're familiar with the daily life of a medieval doctor, their charts, and the maculas lining their shelves. But what happens when urine meets royalty? Ah yes, things get a little more elaborate, slightly absurd, and quietly tragic. Royal patience, more pee, more drama. Imagine a king waking up with a headache, or a queen complaining of digestive discomfort after a particularly indulgent banquet. The court physician would be summoned immediately, not to offer sympathy, but to inspect the urine. Royal urine had to be perfectly presented. Gold-trimmed flasks were optional but recommended, because nothing says prestige like having your bodily fluids displayed in precious metal. Doctors would take immense care. They'd examine the color, sediment, and even the spirit of the urine. Sometimes they swirled it, sniffed it, and then declared the humor of the monarch slightly melancholic or dominantly choleric, which for the royals could determine diet, travel plans, and whether or not they should avoid public appearances for a week. Peculiar remedies fit for a king. Now, once the diagnosis was made, the prescriptions often became theatrical. 1. Elixirs and potions. A common treatment involved mixing herbs, wine, and occasionally minerals to balance humors. For a king, these might be served in golden goblets, with the physician hovering nearby to ensure proper consumption. 2. Bloodletting. Royal bloodletting was almost ceremonial. Leeching a nobleman was done slowly, with attendants and attendants in waiting, as if the entire court were observing a small ritual. 3. Dietary restrictions. Sometimes, the only treatment involved telling the monarch what not to eat. Avoid beans and cabbage for 7 days, the doctor might advise. This could drastically affect court life, because meals were social events, and the king's diet dictated everyone else's menu. 4. Magical additions. Occasionally, the elixirs included charms, blessed stones, or minor rituals to ward off bad humors. Because medicine was still entangled with superstition, the court physician wasn't just a doctor. They were a performer, a diplomat, and occasionally a scapegoat. If the monarch didn't recover, well, the matula probably wasn't bright enough. The queen's chamber pot, secrets and scandals. In many royal households, urine inspection was intimate. Female patients, particularly queens, often had their urine collected in private by chambermaids. The physician would then discreetly examine it, a process both essential and socially delicate. Sometimes, the results of these inspections carried political weight. For example, if the queen's urine indicated melancholy or excess phlegm, rumors of her ill health could spread through court gossip. A king might adjust his political alliances based on whether his queen was considered fertile or ill. So yes, urine was not just medical, it was also political. Strange remedies for royal maladies. Now let's float into the slightly stranger side of these treatments. Fecal matter in ointments. Sometimes, doctors recommended applying animal dung mixed with herbs to wounds. Live creatures, snails or leeches might be applied to the skin. Unusual drinks. Mercury, wine, and assorted animal parts could be mixed into drinks. For royals, these treatments were often slightly more refined, served in gold cups, sometimes sweetened with honey, and always under the careful eye of the court physician. Despite their oddity, these remedies were taken seriously. After all, if the king or queen sneezed wrong, it could destabilize an entire kingdom. Pee and fertility, a curious connection. Doctors also used urine to diagnose fertility problems. Women who could not conceive were often subjected to careful uroscopy. The color, cloudiness, and sediment supposedly revealed whether conception was likely. This led to curious interventions. Herbal tonics, sometimes including animal testes or other odd ingredients. Diet adjustments, rituals that mixed prayer with science. It's hard to know whether any of it worked, but in a society obsessed with dynasties, the stakes were enormous. Courtly competition, who had the best doctor, Having a physician skilled in uroscopy could be a status symbol. Courts competed to have the most learned, most fashionable doctors. Portraits of these doctors, holding a gleaming matula, became subtle propaganda. A successful court doctor could rise to immense influence, advising on everything from diets to political decisions. Conversely, a doctor who misread a flask might be quietly dismissed, or worse, blamed if the monarch's health declined. It was a profession built on confidence, ritual, and the occasional correct guess. The ritual of the daily sample. In some courts, collecting the urine itself was ceremonial. The queen or princess would provide a sample at dawn, sometimes accompanied by attendants in ceremonial garb. The physician would examine it, make notes, and declare the daily health forecast. Some aristocrats even kept private urine charts, recording colors, clarity, and mood correlations over weeks or months. Think of it as a medieval version of a wellness journal, but with bodily fluids. And because this was all socially sanctioned, everyone pretended it was completely normal. Because nothing says sophistication like analyzing pee for hours every morning. Pee in royal portraits, a surprising legacy. Occasionally, the obsession with urine even made it into art. Some portraits of doctors show them holding the matula like a scepter. It symbolized knowledge, authority, and access to the royal body, literally. Royal patronage made these doctors famous. Being painted with a golden flask guaranteed status, regardless of actual skill. It's ironic, centuries later, the image of a physician with a jar of yellow liquid looks absurd, but at the time, it was a mark of prestige. Weird stories from the courts. There are scattered accounts of extreme devotion to uroscopy. In one Italian court, a physician was accused of misdiagnosing the Duke because he did not sufficiently meditate on the sample in candlelight. A French queen reportedly insisted on her physician tasting her urine to confirm sweetness, as a proxy for fertility. In England, some aristocrats refused treatment unless their doctor could produce at least 10 jars for inspection, comparing hues for accuracy. These anecdotes are minor tragedies, little glimpses of obsession and ceremony in a world without modern medicine. The slow shift toward science. By the late 16th and early 17th centuries, anatomy, chemistry, and microscopy began to erode the dominance of uroscopy. Doctors discovered blood circulates, not just flows in mysterious humors. The body has organs that actually perform measurable functions. Microbes exist. Still, pee didn't vanish entirely. Doctors continued to observe it, but increasingly as part of a chemical analysis, not mysticism. And in some places, the matula remained a decorative reminder of tradition. The quiet tragedy of obsession. In reflecting on these centuries, there's a gentle, almost melancholic quality to the obsession with urine. Doctors worked tirelessly, often isolated, performing rituals that seem absurd today. Patients trusted them implicitly, submitting to tastings, bloodletting, and herbal concoctions. The practice persisted for generations, not because it was effective, but because it satisfied the human desire for knowledge and control in a world of uncertainty. And in that quiet persistence, there's something strangely admirable, even if it involved jars of pee. Closing thoughts for part 4. So if you're still with me, take a deep breath. We've wandered through royal courts, ceremonial jars, bizarre remedies, and the subtle politics of bodily fluids. Next, in part 5, we'll drift even further into the failures, scandals, and absurdities of medieval medicine. We'll explore doctors who misdiagnosed kings, the economics of charlatans versus trained physicians, and the cultural obsession that kept matulas on shelves for centuries. Because, of course, no story of pee is complete without a few tragicomic missteps along the way.